Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Mark Earshai, and I'm the director of the Odyssey Arts Initiative, an initiative founded in summer 2020 for the advancement of art through the open inclusion of diverse perspectives, identities, and backgrounds. As part of our initiative, we are excited to present the Odyssey Institute series, a platform for thinkers, artists, activists, and educators to discuss and brainstorm upon ideas to further Odyssey's mission throughout the arts. The Odyssey Institute's work primarily takes place in the form of conversations, thus encouraging open dialogue on a wide swath of topics. These conversations are then condensed and codified into materials such as handouts, videos on demand, and presentations in the Odyssey Forum. The forum acts as a resource for artists, administrators, and audience members to learn about ways to promote community building, to include identities and backgrounds in programming and case-making for the arts, and to interact more effectively with audiences. In our latest edition of the Odyssey Institute series, we were joined by guest speaker Amy K. Bormet, director of the Washington Women in Jazz Festival, and Lynn Voronneau, acclaimed French-Canadian jazz vocalist. You can view the entire conversation as recorded live on our YouTube channel. Today, we are joined by two young entries into the field and discussion of mental health and its awareness. We're excited to present both in a conversation on how artists can consider both mental health and disabilities in the arts, and how organizations and institutions can care better for our artists. First, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening's discussion, Sam Gurth. Sam Gurth is an aspiring social worker. She graduated with a Bachelor's of Social Work in 2020 and is completing her Master's of Social Work as an advanced standing student at Rutgers University. Since high school, Sam has been working and advocating for mental health awareness and those with disabilities. She has been president of Active Minds, a mental health awareness club in undergrad, and worked with children with disabilities in high school. While completing her master's degree, Sam is interning at an inpatient adolescent psychiatric hospital, where she experiences and works with children in crisis. Here, she is learning and advocating for better mental health services and understanding the impact of society on children's mental health. She hopes to continue to advocate and work in the mental health field in her professional career. Joining Sam this afternoon is our guest speaker, Rebecca Karu. Rebecca Karu is a spirited horn player based in the New Jersey and New York City areas. As an up-and-coming performing artist, she demonstrates versatility in both her musicianship and as an educator within the music community. Along with being an impassioned musician, Rebecca has an ardent devotion to artistic development. Rebecca attended Montclair State University, where she received her bachelor's degree in music performance. During her time there, she studied with Jeff Scott, who has and continues to be a great friend and mentor. She now continues her studies at the Mannes School of Music and looks forward to pursuing a DMA this fall. As an advocate for musicians' health, Rebecca has her own blog entitled Mind Over Practice: Integrated Perspectives on Health and Performance. Her blog addresses topics that range from performance anxiety management to how to schedule productive practice sessions. She emphasizes the importance of prioritizing our health, mind, and general well-being as artists to then later enhance our performance abilities. She also holds a certificate in Essentials of Performing Arts Medicine from the Performing Arts Medicine Associate in conjunction with the American College of Sports Medicine. Rebecca is also an active member of the Performing Arts Medicine Association. Additionally, Rebecca recently gave a masterclass on performance anxiety at the 2020 Eurobrass Festival, and she also gave a masterclass for Echo Musicians Connect on how to uncover your artistic confidence. Without further ado, please welcome Rebecca Karu and Sam Gurth. Rebecca, Sam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
So please feel free to take it away, and thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, so thank you for having us. And I just also want to thank our audience for being here because it's a really important conversation for us to have. So, them being here is a way for us to start this conversation and get that message out about mental health and disabilities in the arts and in the community as a whole. So, Rebecca, I know we talked a lot yesterday. We reviewed some of these questions and we got a lot of information that I'm excited to share with our audience. So, for our first question, I want to start with mental health. And I'm going to just read some statistics just so that we have a background of what's going on in the arts community with their mental health. So, as an ever present crisis in the arts industry, and particularly in the music world, according to the British charity Help Musicians, 87% of musicians in the UK say that their mental health has deteriorated over the past year. 66% say a major factor in this was the feeling of a lack of purpose, and 96% said that they were worried about their financial situation generally. How can musicians, artists, as a community work to support each other in the mental health crisis and the general mental health crisis plaguing the arts?
So I think that this is like a great question to start with, especially addressing COVID and how COVID has really affected the performing arts community, especially in terms of mental health. So let me address that side of it first, addressing COVID and how it's kind of affected this community. So I know that the statistic was that 66% of us feel like there is a lack of purpose. Right now, there are very, very, very limited performing jobs out there. There's not many auditions going on at all. There's many people still out of work, not receiving any funds from the organizations that they were with. So, you know, during this time, it's been difficult. It's been difficult financially. It's been difficult emotionally and mentally, and it takes a toll. But I kind of want to address this with something that I did see on the internet that we did talk a little bit about before. And that was there was a newspaper article that had come out listing the the five top essential jobs in the world and the five most non-essential jobs in the world. And the number one on the most non-essential job was artists. So when you think of a lack of purpose, I mean, and then you look at this journal article in this newspaper, you question it for a minute, and you look at the drawing that was put together. You look at the people who put together the article in full, who did all the formatting, who did all of the editing and writing. And with that being said, think about what we all did over COVID. Imagine if we went through lockdown without music, without TV, without Netflix or Hulu or whatever people watch these days. Imagine if we went through lockdown without having, you know, pencils and paper to doodle and draw to pass the time. When people say that the number one most non-essential job is artists, I think that really, really, really strikes a nerve with people. Because again, remember, if we didn't have any of this during COVID, we'd be staring at a wall. We would be. So while artists, in a way, are not out there saving lives, in that sense, no, it's not the most essential job. But in terms of sanity and in terms of keeping and being able to try to stay in this peaceful and calm frame of mind, which was really, really difficult for many of us to do in such an uncertain time, art was always there for all of us in some different form, whether it was music or television or painting, however we decided to pass our time. So with that being said, again, no, not the top essential job to save a life, but the top essential job to save your sanity. So with that being said, a lack of purpose, when you have nothing to look forward to, you don't have jobs on the horizon that are coming out for you to work towards. when you don't have concerts to go and listen to, or teachers to go and see and take lessons with in person, or ensembles and people to play with, whether you're in school or it's a community ensemble, when your whole world is basically taken away from you, and now you're sitting in your house saying, what do I do with my craft? What do I do with all of this time and energy that I've spent working and building towards a certain career goal, and now that career goal isn't in existence currently? It's coming back slowly and surely, but the lack of purpose that many of us felt after being sent away from school, jobs, whatever it might have been, it's real. So in terms of COVID, it's been a really difficult time for musicians and performing arts in general, actors, actresses, dancers, singers, anybody. So with that being said, moving into the financial part of it, many people had, concerns about finances. When we look at how many jobs, not only the arts community lost, but in general, I mean, people were saying, there are a lot of articles written about how this hasn't been seen since like the Great Depression. And it'll probably take about 4 years for this to nearly rebuild itself. I know a lot of people spend time thinking, when are orchestras going to come back? When are we going to be able to go and, sit in an ensemble and play normally without masks or instrument covers or plexiglass walls next to you? And the truth is nobody knows. The truth is nobody knows, and it's scary. And to think that the performing arts is probably, and we can say that it's one of the most, it's one of the jobs out there that, financial security and financial instability is always in question. Not when we're dealing with COVID. I mean, to make a career out of music, some might say it's impractical. I would argue that it's not. Do I think that it's difficult? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think that it's impractical. I don't think that it's impossible. So with that being said, financial insecurity is even more real now than it has been in the past. And I think that in terms of, what can we kind of do moving forward? I think that in terms of coming out of school, I think is one of the biggest fears for many people. Many people just continue to go to school because they don't really know what to do. I know in the arts, we talk about this like 3-track thing. You can either go into the orchestral field, the chamber field, or you could be a soloist. I don't personally think that you have to pick one track for your whole life. Some people might argue that you do. I don't feel that you do. But with that being said, when you go to school, you're taught history, you're taught theory, you're taught the fundamentals of your instrument, you're taught how to play musically. You go through these in-depth conversations with your teachers about, what to do post whatever degree you're trying to receive. And for many people, we then step into the real world and we go, oh my God, what do I do? Because the practicality of a music degree, it's difficult because most of the time, say you're going down the orchestral route, many people I know, they take audition after audition after audition after audition and they get rejected. Some people are like, I took 27 auditions and I finally won my 28th audition. It takes time and it takes patience. But in the meantime, after you leave school, say you go and you do your undergrad, you come out of school, you decide to go get a master's, you go get your master's, and you don't want to pursue any more higher education. You leave school, and for many of us, we panic. For many of us, it's maybe this wasn't the career path I should have went down because I don't have a job. there is no financial stability right now. I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know how to do this, that, and the other thing. And I think in terms of how can we make this better? How can we help ease the mental and physical strain of being financially unstable? How can we avoid that almost? How can we avoid this stress and these triggers of, okay, now I'm in the real world and I don't know what to do? And I think that that comes from your institution. Out of my 6 years that I've been in college, I have taken one entrepreneurship class that was required for my master's degree. And that class, I think, was a saving grace for many of us. I think that now we see so many people on social media trying to network with each other and trying to do things to make up for the lack of opportunities in the real world right now. So social media is a blessing and a curse. I will put that out there to begin with. But when we talk about what we can do to make things better for people, to make some of these burdens not be a burden, I think that part of it is that we can start with making sure that we get the proper education as a whole. If you're going into the music performing industry or the performing arts in general, whether you want to be a Broadway actress or you want to go sing at the Met, we have to make sure that the schools and the institutions are setting us up for success. I firmly believe that every single school should have a business or entrepreneurship class to offer their students. One for definitely master's degrees, but even for undergraduates to say, you know, this isn't it. Like, you just knowing how to play your instrument isn't the end of this. It's just the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, if we're not set up for success, where do we think that this anxiety can come from? This depression that we feel from feeling like we have a lack of purpose when we go out there and we put our best foot forward and we take these auditions and we do the best we can and we get rejected. The mental health side of this starts kicking in when we go after these auditions. We do everything that we can and we get rejected. We get rejected, our confidence plummets because we might feel that we're not good enough for this industry. And that is often told to people, especially through their college careers. At one point, I took a lesson with somebody who had said, how many, I was a sophomore in college, and he goes, how many hours a week or how many hours a day do you practice? And I was like, comfortably 2. And I was, again, sophomore in college. And he looks at me and he starts telling me about this 10,000 hour rule, where if you don't practice 10,000 hours before like a certain point in your life or whatever, you won't be successful. And I was like, and I left that lesson going, is he right? But many, many years later down the road, I've had many conversations with many different teachers. Some who have said, if you practice any more than 3 hours a day, you're crazy, because that physically hurts you. I'm a brass player, play French horn. If I play any more than, if I sit down and practice for 3 hours straight, I mean, that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's enough. And the problem is, many musicians, many performing artists get into this mindset of, I have to do this many hours a day. I have to do X, Y, and Z. I have to be perfect. I have to, I have to get to this place in my ability to be able to be successful. And if I'm not there by this age, then my career is over. And it's such a terrible, terrible, terrible way to think about the performing arts. People sit there and they watch musicians, and it's like, to them, that is a luxury. for some people. That is an event that they go and see, and it's moving to them. But behind, on the other side, on that stage, you have many, many people who put in so much work and still don't feel that their best is good enough. So when we talk about the performing arts and mental health, we then get into it in general, you know, in COVID, out of COVID, in general. Mental health starts creeping in because you don't feel like you have the ability to get to where you need to be. You feel like you have to have it all figured out by the age of 25. I've had people say to me before, they're like, oh, what do you go to school for? I'm like, oh, I go to school for music. They're like, well, what do you want to do with that? I'm like, oh, I want to play professionally. I want to play in an orchestra. They're like, so you're going to be homeless? I'm like, thank you for that. There's this pressure of in the world in general that, like, once you're out of college, you have to have a job. You have to get insurance. Your parents kick you out. There's stress and pressure. And in the performing arts, it's not like that. There's a different road for performing artists to get to where they need to be. And this stress and pressure that we get put on, or that people put on us for not being where they are or where they were in life at when we're 25, it's pressure, it's anxiety, it's depression, it's we're not good enough, I'm never going to be good enough, everything has to be perfect, and if I'm not perfect, then I'm sunk. So with that being said, mental health in the performing arts is huge. For me, I never used to believe in myself. I went to get my master's, and to be honest, like, I was that person in the room who would go on stage. I would, perform really well in auditions, and I'd go on stage for performing opportunities, and I'd get off stage and I was like, that's the worst I've ever played. I'm not as good as the people sitting next to me. I don't know how I placed where I placed. I don't know how I was given the opportunities that I was given. I should not be here. And for me, during COVID, while the first couple of weeks I sat in my room and I said, what the heck am I going to do? There's nothing for me right now. What is there to look forward to? What is there to do to make me want to keep going in this field? I know so many people who consider just completely changing their major and dropping music because they're like, this is never coming back. But when you get to some of these points, like, you want to crack. And again, people sometimes overlook this. People take this pressure and they say, well, that's just performing arts. Like, of course you're a perfectionist. No, take it back. That's not healthy. You have to, and for me, like, during COVID, personally, I took a lot of time to really sit down and figure out, how do I move forward from here? How do I make sure that I can keep going? How do I make sure that I don't give up on my dreams? Because I've been a musician, like, my whole life. I grew up playing piano when I started when I was like 4 or 5, and like, now I'm here. This has always been something that I wanted to do. So for many people struggling with, whether it's anxiety, performance anxiety specifically, whether it's depression, whether it's feeling a lack of purpose, whether it's not having imposter syndrome and not thinking that you're ever good enough, not thinking that you deserve the things that you get because you are good enough. I mean, what can you do to help these people? In school, one of my biggest things was making sure that, like, I was a good colleague to everybody around me. Making sure that while I didn't necessarily always believe in myself, and I was on a path to changing that, which I have, over this past year, I've complete 180. I always wanted to make sure that I was a good colleague, that when people needed to come to me and say, I can't do this, I want to give up, I have terrible performance anxiety, I don't know what to do, I have 18 auditions, what can I do? I wanted to be that person that people could come to. And I wanted to be that person to say, come play for me. Why don't we set up a mock audition on Sunday and 3 of us will come and we'll all play for each other. We'll give, constructive criticism and let's go from there. Sometimes there are people struggling with mental health so severely that you have to proceed with caution a little bit. And I say this in the most empathetic kind of way. There are some people, and I'll talk a little bit about this later when we talk about disability specifically, but you have to be careful when you offer advice to people too, because sometimes there are people who aren't looking for advice. They're looking for just comfort. They're looking for somebody to say, you're going to get through this. This is okay. Please come to me if you need anything. If you need a resource, if you need to go get a coffee, if you need a shoulder to cry on, if you need a listening ear, please come to me. Sometimes it's not about saying the right thing. Sometimes it's about taking a second and listening to people's needs. And mental health, can get scary. And I'm sure you know that with your work, it can get scary. And some people don't know what to do with that. But to make sure, what I can encourage is to make sure that you check in on your students, on your friends, on your colleagues, whether you're close to them or you're not close to them. Just say, hey, I just want to check in. How are you doing? Sometimes that can make or break a situation for some people and make people say, oh man, they care.
Yeah, and I think in the terms of that, it's very important to have a supportive role in someone's life. And what I'm hearing from your conversation is it's very important for institutions as a whole to really help with that overall big skills building of having skills in different industries and different areas like business and things like that. So they know how to play the instrument, but they also know how to engage with others and build their own business and be able to have that entrepreneurship background so they know how to do things. And also I think it is very important that on a personal level, we need to have a section of people being okay, instead of tearing each other down and saying, oh, you're not good enough, oh, you need to practice more, having that supportive role so they know that there's someone in their corner. They know that okay, this person thinks I'm good enough. So even if they don't think that, they know that someone is rooting for them and looking out for them. So that really helps with building that confidence and hopefully helping manage those symptoms of anxiety and performance anxiety so they know that they have other people around them. And coming off of that, I know it's really important to support each other as a whole in the community, but also a major factor and component of the communities of art is the audience. People who listen, people who watch, people who pay to go see different concerts. So what are some ways that the audience can be involved and support the mental health of artists?
I think for starters, we need to look at performing artists as people. Sometimes we see them more as idols. We idolize people in a way that is, superstardom. And when it comes down to it, whether it's a Broadway actor, whether it's somebody playing principal horn and you idolize them for years and you want to sound exactly like them and whatever it is, even people who have nothing to do with, the performing arts and don't know anything about a flute or whatever, they just come and enjoy the moment. I think that recognize that everybody is a human being, that we all go through different journeys, we all go through different things in life. And with that being said, you never know what somebody's struggling with, ever. Especially if you don't know that person personally. So for me, I think if you have the opportunity to go and see a performance, first be kind to anybody you come across. If you see a performing artist after, people have come up to me that I don't know and they're like, oh my God, you sound wonderful. that means a lot coming from, anybody. Whether it's somebody who knows like music or Broadway or singing techniques like in depth, or whether they're just coming to enjoy the moment with you. It's important to be kind. And if you can offer and extend a compliment, extend gratitude for what they just did to entertain you, absolutely. That means, that means the world to some people. If somebody's having a really rough day, I've sat in concerts where I'm having a really bad time during a concert. I'm like, I've missed every single note. I'm having a bad time. I have no idea where we are, and this is not it. Just going out there and, giving somebody the opportunity to feel good, I think is important. And with that being said, don't take advantage of these experiences. I mean, if we look at everything due to COVID, there were so many people who went to orchestra concerts. There were so many people that went to band concerts, college concerts, whatever it might be, who just wanted to live in the moment. And first, like seeing everything firsthand, now we know that the performing arts are one of the first things to go when, a crisis like this hits. And there are still many, many, many people out of work who are struggling financially and emotionally. So I want to take like a minute to say that for anybody who's been following like the Met Orchestra, Met Opera, they're struggling. Their musicians are struggling. Their cast and crew are struggling, and it's not a good time. And I feel for them, and so many people around the world feel for the Met. So this is important in a different way, but if you have the ability to donate even like $5 to an organization that really needs it, like the Met right now, I would absolutely say please do so. Because when things start coming back, they're an organization, and there are, orchestra members, cast members, opera members that need this, that are struggling financially, that need our assistance as spectators, as listeners, as people in the industry, people who aren't in the industry. Anything that you can do to make a difference in somebody's life is important, whether it's a compliment, a smile, a pat on the back, good. I mean, I guess don't touch people now, but but you know what I mean. And I think that, in terms of right now, helping somebody that you can is really important.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you said. And the big things that I heard from your conversation was the monetary value is obviously like the donations is like a really important thing, because that's a big thing for mental health, is if you can meet your basic needs of like shelter, food, like water, and like having that stability in your life, which a lot of people in the arts don't have right now, can help like with like guaranteeing like that they have something, can help with that mental health of like the nervousness and the anxiety of like what comes next, like where will I get my next meal. So obviously donations are a huge part of helping artists. And then I also liked where you talked about the in the moment, because that made me think of in the moment you're enjoying this, like complimenting them and like having like those conversations of like support and supporting them. But also the other side is seeing people as people. So like you can enjoy this moment with them, but that moment is just not all that they are. So they're this moment, they're performing on stage, but also they might have been struggling, and they might go home and like be worried about where their next meal may come from. So it's like kind of separating them as like not idolizing them, but like seeing them as like, okay, you did this thing, you made me happy, but also you're a person, and those things that you do right now will not translate to everyday life. So seeing people as people, donations, and being very supportive are like, I think that's the main things that came out of this conversation about audience.
Absolutely.
So this was a really interesting topic, and I love that mental health, and I could talk about mental health like ever. Like, this conversation would never end. But I do want to move on to the next important topic, which is about people with disabilities, and especially people with disabilities in the arts. Because obviously we've seen a lot of like many high profile musicians and artists who suffered from like very visible disabilities, like Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles, for example. They all suffer or suffered from loss of sight. And while this is like something that you can see in them, or like they have to use like specific things to help them get around, there are invisible disabilities, things that we don't see, things that people might be suffering on internally, but they might look like they're healthy and they might look like they can get around in a way. So with that, what are like, how are these disabilities perceived in the arts in general, invisible and visible disabilities?
So I think that it's a difficult topic to discuss because I do find that sometimes it's ignored a little bit. So for starters, right, there are plenty of people who battle invisible illnesses, who look perfectly healthy on the outside. There's nothing that would make you think otherwise about them, think twice. But sometimes, like, battling these diseases that even you can't see can warrant for accommodations that you might need. So in that respect, sometimes people don't understand that. When, for example, I sit when I perform solo. While it doesn't look good on stage, that's what I have to do because I am prone to fainting and passing out, and I have a problem with like my nervous system that affects my blood pressure, my heart rate, and so on and so forth. So for me, sitting and making sure that I can kind of avoid hitting the ground is something that I might need. So with that being said, there was one day where, like, I'll tell you like a little brief story. But there was one day where I was taking a lesson with somebody and I was playing through some stuff and I was sitting. And I didn't know this person. They didn't really know me. And with that being said, they were like, well, why do you sit? Why do you sit and perform? They're like, are you lazy? You're lazy, aren't you? And at that point, like, in that moment, number one, I knew I was never going to talk to this person again. Number two, this is a moment where people need to watch themselves. And I say that in the kindest way that I can. Because when you look at me, I look healthy. I look like a 24-year-old who's hanging out, playing her instrument. And the truth is, it's not always like that. The truth is, sometimes I'm sitting here and I'm in pain and I still have to practice, or I'm just trying to get by. And there's plenty other people out there, like myself, who feel that way. So in this instance, rather than this person making the assumption that I'm just lazy and that's why I sit and play, they could have politely inquired and could have just said, like, usually people stand. Is there a reason you don't stand? Like I just want to know, like, are you just more comfortable sitting? Like, what's the deal? And this conversation could have gone, a totally different way. So with this being said, because of reactions like, oh, are you just lazy? It makes people hesitant sometimes to ask for help when they really do need it. And B, it makes people hesitant to want to share something with you. While I don't have to be candid about the struggles that I go through, I am, because there have been a bunch of people who have said, well, maybe you shouldn't say anything because you might not get a job. You might be looked over for this opportunity, because maybe they think you're not reliable. And I think with people with visible disabilities, I think that is real too. I mean, briefly in the general performing arts, we talked a little bit about this too. Sia came out with a movie recently that was very, 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 very poorly received. It was very poorly put together. It was just not in good taste, not in good. It was just not good, and not good in the sense that first off, they had hired an actor to play an autistic girl, but the actor is neurotypical. The actor that they hired had to then watch videos of autistic people to learn how to be autistic. And that's offensive to so many people. That is not okay, because she could have taken the opportunity to find someone who is autistic, who could have done the role, because this is what we don't look at. There are plenty of autistic actors out there, actors and actresses. There are plenty of people who are capable of doing the job, and to say, well, I hired her because she could do something that somebody else couldn't. Did you just hire her because it was the easy choice, or did you hire her because you have a problem? And so this movie was very poorly received. And there's plenty of organizations out there who highlight people with disabilities, and who highlight, actors and actresses who are maybe autistic, or who may be on the spectrum in some way. And with that being said, we need to recognize that overlooking somebody with a chronic illness, overlooking somebody with cancer, overlooking somebody with autism and to not hire them because of such, is blatant discrimination. And there's no kinder way to put that. And that's why so many people, especially those with invisible illnesses, number one, people might be like, well, you're lying. Two, people may overlook our needs because they can't see that we might need something. Nobody can see that I'm going to faint. Nobody can see that somebody might go into diabetic shock until it happens. Nobody can see these things. But you still have to take into account that if somebody says, hey, I need 5 minutes and I have to go lay down in the back, I have to go grab a bag of pretzels, I got to go do this, you give it to them. And if you don't, I mean, you could be, if you say, no, you can't go eat your bag of pretzels, I mean, you could literally be harming somebody in the process of saying no. So when we talk about invisible and, visible illnesses, I think that they're perceived in maybe a little bit of a different way. I think that maybe it's easier. Well, it's definitely easier if you have an invisible illness to not say anything because you're scared, because you don't want to miss out on opportunities because people might take them away from you. And with that being said, I mean, whether you have an invisible illness or a visible illness, first off, you don't have to disclose any information you don't want to anybody. And I wrote a whole blog post a couple weeks ago about ableism in and out of the performing arts. And I talked about how to be a good ally a lot. So, but one of these things that really, stuck out to me was that if somebody has a visible illness, maybe they use like a mobility aid, maybe a cane, maybe they're in a wheelchair. Don't ask them what happened. There are many people who have like this perceived notion, like say, "Oh my God, what happened?" I mean, it's a little bit, if people want to disclose information to you, be willing to listen, not to judge, to listen. If people choose to not disclose information to you, it might not have anything to do with you, and don't take it personally. So, with that being said, I think listening and learning are probably the two best things that you can offer somebody, regardless of what type of illness or things they may face. And then, second, this kind of goes back to something that I said earlier about mental health. Do not offer somebody advice, unsolicited advice. I should say that. Don't offer people unsolicited advice, because there are plenty of people who think that maybe certain things, like maybe alternative medicine, that could cure you. Like, I'll be very honest. Like, there are many things out there that are chronic that you cannot cure, not by any amount of yoga, not by any amount of essential oils or Mediterranean diets or whatever. You can't cure them, and you can't treat them, or you can treat them. You can't cure them, but you can treat them.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I think, with that being said, I think that they're not always perceived in the best way. People are looked at as maybe they can't do the job, or they're weak, or they're not reliable. And unless somebody says blatantly to you, "I cannot accept this opportunity," there's no reason not to hire somebody because of what they go through.
Mm-hmm.
None.
Yeah, and like what you said is, like you said that they're ignored and that it's sometimes perceived in a negative light because people do say, "Don't tell this person that," or "Don't do this," or like, but if someone signs up for an opportunity, that means they know that they can do this, and they know that like if they're in a certain situation, they can do their best and they can try their best because they want to do this. So it sounds like what a lot of people need to start doing is respecting other people's space, understanding that like if they signed up for something, they can do it, and kind of if someone doesn't want to share their story, it's not their place to share it. They can do it if they want, but expecting others to share their story and to like listen to that unsolicited advice, it's just not what they're here for. They're here to play their instrument, they're here to work their hardest, they're here to be on the same level as everyone else and be as equals with everybody. So it's important in the arts, is what it sounds like, that people with disabilities that are visible and invisible need to be respected on the same level as everybody else.
Exactly. And with that being said, I mean, sometimes there are plenty of days where I feel fine and I can, go to and do this and do that, and there are some days where I can't. And being able to be vocal to the music director or to whoever you need to be vocal to, and for them to be understanding, to say, "Okay, do what you have to do, get a sub, like a reliable sub, and we hope you feel better." There's a way to respond to some of these
Mm-hmm.
things too. And if you need accommodations for anything, I would not ever be hesitant to ask and present that to somebody. And some people might be hesitant. They might be hesitant to, out themselves, in the sense of they don't want to disclose too much information, but they do need this. And that's okay. And again,
Mm-hmm.
it's not somebody's place to say, "Well, why?" It's your place to say, "You need that? Absolutely. Done." So exactly, respect.
Yeah. So since we spoke about the respect, we spoke about like if people want to disclose, they'll disclose, those types of things, and just like not giving the unsolicited advice and like understanding that if a person needs to do something, they have to do it, because like you said, if someone doesn't eat their bag of pretzels or lay down, it could be very harmful for them. So going off of that, and I know we spoke about a lot, are there any other steps that artists can take to support their fellow artists with disabilities?
Yeah, so the couple that I just had mentioned, not offering unsolicited advice, respect and everything. So definitely like listen, learn, and like I said before, always be kind to people. Whether you know somebody or you don't, or you think you know somebody, um, being kind and not making judgments before you know or before you understand. So things like this can be like watching your vocabulary. There are many people who use disability terms or use terms and use like disabilities to label things or use them as like adjectives almost. Um, and these are kind of considered microaggressions. If you're somebody who just likes to be neat and organized and that's how you are, to say, oh my gosh, I'm just so OCD about these things is not, no. Unless you're like clinically diagnosed with OCD and you understand what the people who have OCD go through, you're not OCD. You're just someone who likes to be neat and tidy. So using stuff like that or being like, oh, like they're so, bipolar or whatever. No, like
No.
no. Stop using these things as adjectives to describe somebody, to describe a feeling or describe um, an event or whatever. It's not appropriate. It's disrespectful, and it makes us feel belittled in a sense. If you're trying to compare your neat and tidiness to somebody who has OCD, who might have to wash their hands 30 times, like, or turn a light switch on, like, 16 times before they can, leave the situation. People who deal with like real things, you're harming these people by comparing your tidiness to that. You don't understand what these people go through. You don't understand the severe effects that some people have these illnesses or mental health concerns, like, to a degree. We don't understand. So with that being said, watching the way you use terms, watching the way you might react to a situation, watching your language and being aware that this is harmful to people, that this is not okay to use. And then I think that one of my last things would be is there's so many people who believe in alternative medicine, and I'm not saying anything about alternative medicine. I think that if it works for you, you like it, cool. I don't think that it doesn't work for some people, but I also think that it doesn't work for some people. So with that being said, when it comes to taking prescription medication and people taking prescription medication, mind your business. It's not your place to judge somebody for taking prescription medication, whether it's for anxiety, whether it's for depression, whether it's for dealing with like your heart, or dealing with maybe you have diabetes and you need insulin. Like, stop the whole you shouldn't take prescription drugs, you shouldn't take prescription medication, it's bad for you. Some people really need it, and it's not anybody's place and it's not anybody's business to judge anybody for taking prescription medications that are prescribed by a doctor who you see. If you're not seeing that person's doctor, or if you're not seeing a doctor and you want to go, do whatever you want to do, you do that. But if somebody is under the care of a physician and they're dealing with whatever they need to deal with them, mind your business. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah. And and then I think now we're going to move into the Q&A section, Mark.
Yes, that's right. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm still fiddling with the tech things. Yes, yeah, we are at the hour mark, which means that we are moving into our Q&A. Rebecca, Sam, thank you so much for being here and for having already what's been a really interesting and really in-depth conversation. So thank you guys. At this time, for our audience, we'd love to open it up to a Q&A. Please feel free to put any of your questions or comments in the chat below. You can direct them towards Rebecca or to Sam or both. So please feel free. In the meantime, while questions are starting to come in, I am going to go ahead and ask one of my own, just because I, was following along and I am curious about something. I think I heard in the conversation a lot of great advice about things that artists and managers and presenters can be more conscientious of, things that maybe they can be more attentive to the kinds of language they use, or the kinds of interactions that they have, or even the kinds of interactions that they endorse without actually having them themselves. Institutions supporting a teacher who interacts in a certain way with a student, for example. I wonder, and actually, I'd love to start with you, Sam. What kinds of thoughts, having talked about some of the things that are better to watch out for, I wonder if you have any thoughts, particularly from your social work background, of things that maybe some of these organizations can be more proactive about, some more steps that they can take that might be more of kind of an investment nature into the mental health of the audience and the artists they help support.
Well, what I would say too is with that, like the education part of like just having like this conversation and talking about it can help reduce the stigma with that connection. So if like artists are talking about like their mental health struggles, it can help audience members in turn like relate to them more and be like, oh, this is also something that I struggle with. So they're able to be like, okay, like I do this thing as well. So now I don't feel uncomfortable disclosing it, or I feel empowered by someone else who does have more of that like leadership role in the community. And then also like I feel institutions, when they're working with artists and they're working like with different people, and even like the people in the background, like the stage crew and things like that, like everyone has their own story, and I feel like that respect and education really needs to happen to be able to support people's mental health. And then also what we said earlier with the financial aspect of artists, should have that stability. So even if it's like grant money or donations or anything, like everyone deserves that stability to be able to like, okay, I go home and I know that I have food in my fridge, and I know that like I can pay my bills this week, or I can pay my bills next month. Like having that stability really helps with mental health, because you're now worrying, like now you don't have to worry about like, okay, like I need to go work 2 extra jobs to be able to support myself while I'm trying to do my music career. So having that stability and that time to really take steps towards your future versus worrying about everything else and all the background noise that shouldn't be noise at all. It should be, okay, I have a house, I have this. So like that stability really helps strengthen someone's mental health, because they have an area to go to, and they have that stability that they need to go and continue their career.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Rebecca, I wonder if you have any other thoughts to add on to that.
I kind of just really want to echo what Sam said. I mean, she really just said it all.
No, that's great. I mean, that means that, you guys are of like minds, and that's exactly, what we're going for. So that's great. I do have a general question that's coming in from Connor Couch. Thanks for being here in the chat, Connor. Connor is one of our wonderful Odyssey members. Thank you for joining us. He asks, what are some good resources for learning about mental health and disabilities as a leader within arts organizations? I think this is a really interesting question because we're talking about, I think there do exist now several mental health resources for the general public. But I don't know, at least from my perspective as a leader of an arts organization, and maybe Rebecca, you can confirm or deny this, I don't know of many resources that exist like that. Are there any that you can think of off the top of your head?
So to be honest, no. And this is part of the problem that, I like to address. This is part of the reason why I, started my blog and why I talk about topics that have to do with performance anxiety, burnout, ableism and stuff like that, because it's important to have this conversation, and this conversation isn't happening enough. There's not enough awareness or resources on the internet to go to learn more. I do think that your best bet in terms of learning, I will say that the Performing Arts Medicine Association does have a lot of great resources, more geared towards, physical ailments, injuries and stuff like that. But they do have a good chunk of mental health stuff. When I did my certificate course, I learned very in depth about psychology of performing. And, with that being said, also psychology of surrounding performing arts, like injuries, and how that affects performers psychologically. So with that being said, PAMA, Performing Arts Medicine Association, is definitely a great resource for that. But in terms of speaking out about disabilities, I think that information really comes from people who experience it.
Would getting a certificate through PAMA be something that you would recommend for arts leaders?
So I would recommend it. They don't do their certificate year round. It's usually they offer it for a couple months in the summer. I believe that it opened up in May until the end of July last year. I would recommend it just because, for me, this certificate did give me a lot of background about not only musicians, but about dancers, about singers, and it took me through the anatomy and the most common types of injuries that people can experience. And it's a lot of information. It's a lot of in-depth details about injuries, how they may occur, the psychology behind being injured and not wanting to disclose that. I mean, that's another thing. Being somebody who has an injury and not wanting to lose their job or be discounted because of that. And then at the end, learning how to rebuild from coming out of an injury, like the steps that you can offer somebody to take to regain strength, little by little. So I would definitely recommend the certificate program. I will say that for many, there's different types of programs for that. So for mine was the arts educators instrumental one. There's one for vocal. There's one for dancers specifically, and there's also, this course was I took like the non-medical one, like meaning that I'm not a doctor receiving this course, but if you are a doctor, you want to learn more about performing arts for this reason, there is a course more specific to physicians.
I see. Okay. So it comes with like different sorts of concentrations then, is what you're saying?
Yep.
The
so
certificate.
Yep, so there's two parts to it. There's the general overview of all performing arts, and then the second half is specific to the your specificity.
Discipline
Yeah.
slash, yeah, sure. To kind of pivot the question to you, Sam, I wonder if, hopefully you've been thinking about it, if there are any resources that, while they may not be necessarily arts focused, might be leadership focused, for example. I mean, you ran, forgive me, I'm blanking on the name of the club. Thank you. You were president of that organization for a while. So, you know, you've had the experience of being in that kind of leadership position and needing to lean on those kinds of resources. I wonder what kinds of resources you might have in mind.
Well, as like a leader, what I would say is just like the first like general education, like using like Active Mind resources. They have like their website with like general resources, using NAMI. Like if you just Google, like if you have questions, like just Google it. But what I would also say is taking like a class, or like using like, or also what I think would be really important is if you're in a certain location in the arts, so say like you're in New York City and you're working in Broadway, connecting with local resources, like knowing like, okay, like this person offers outpatient therapy, or like knowing like resources, like where like the crisis center is, so that if someone is like suffering from mental health or even physical health, like you have that area, like you can be like, look, like I know this is going on in your life, and like you've disclosed this to me, and I think it'd be really important for you to kind of understand and know, like go into a deeper level of what's going on in you. I think you should go talk to this person, be like, this is a good resource, or like making those connections so that you have like that ability to be like, oh, like you have a lot of performance anxiety, or like this is happening. And even with like we said before, with like the financial issue, knowing community resources, going like, okay, if you go here, they can help you get rent money, or going here and like this is a like is like a shelter, or like a food pantry, so you have that ability to be like you see, if you see someone like needing that assistance and they ask for it, asking for that help, then you're able to give that to them. Also, and this, your certificate program reminded me of this. When I was an undergrad, I took a class called First Aid Mental Health. So obviously I'm deeper in the mental health field, but this was a very like basic class. It taught me about different mental health like issues, like we talked about depression, anxiety, like, and it also, while it did not make you a licensed counselor in any means, it showed you how to have these conversations, how to start them. So if someone is in crisis, or someone is like, you've seen a notice in their behaviors, like you've seen like maybe they're not as interested in playing, or they're showing up late, like indicators of like someone going through like a depressive episode or having symptoms of anxiety, you can be like, hey, I'm noticing this in you, like how can I help, or like are you okay, like just asking those like general questions, and then knowing your resources and knowing who to call, and like being able to start that conversation with them so that they're seeing that other people are noticing their struggle. I have the book up here, I don't remember who it's through. It's through the Mental Health First Aid. So like having that class would be a good thing as a leader, to be like, to starting that conversation and to educating others, which is, I think, is like the most important part.
That would be great to be able to share that book, and also talk about PAMA with our audience, both current and future. If you don't mind sending actually me later after this conversation some of those resources, that would be just some links, because I think that's really important that Odyssey is able to take on that role of introducing artists to these resources. I wonder, I mean, this is probably not your specialty per se, Rebecca, or Sam. We've talked a lot, I think, about performing artists. I wonder about non-performing artists, in the sense of, the crisis that they experience is a different one, in the sense of how their visibility differs from that of a performing artist's visibility. We've been, as performing artists, you and I, Rebecca, especially, have had to reckon with the kind of stifling of that visibility over the past year because of the lack of, ability to perform, the lack of ability to get on a stage, because they're all locked down and our audiences are at home. From somebody whose art making is not necessarily based on those kinds of performing experiences, what kinds of advice might you have for them in terms of connecting with their audiences about their own mental health experiences?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question right.
Yeah.
So,
that's okay.
So are we talking about performing artists who aren't necessarily on a stage, or are we talking about like general population?
We're talking about non-performing artists. Okay. So visual artists, painters, set designers, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're talking about how it differs, kind of?
Well, there's the yes, how it differs, and what kinds of conversations they might have that performing artists might need to be more sensitive to. For example, there's lots of times in film industry, there's discussion about the relationship between the actor versus the script writers versus the camera crew versus the crew that provides meals for the day for everybody. There's a dynamic that's happening in that room. I mean, the same way in music, we have our stage hands, we have our light designers, we have our costume designers if we're an opera. What kinds of things come up in those conversations, and what kinds of things do we need to be aware of? I don't know if that clarified the question at all, or if it just made it worse.
No. But I think it's hard to say, just because I don't specifically know. If I were to take an educated swing at this, I would probably say that maybe their experiences as non-performing artists, like more visual, scriptwriter, camera crew, lighting, their struggles may be a little less visible to us, maybe a little bit overlooked, just because when you are an actor, for example, let's take this as an example. When you're an actor and you're in front of the camera and you have the camera crew, the script writers, producers, lighting, costumes, and everything like that, you're the center of attention almost, making sure that your costuming is right, your lighting is right, you're doing things justice. You're the center of attention. So sometimes I would feel as if maybe mental health in somebody who is a non-performing artist is maybe a little bit overlooked, in the sense that they're there just doing their job. They're not the one with the most focus on them. So, if an actor is having an issue, almost everybody would know, right? If a camera person is having an issue, they might not be as vocal about it because they aren't the prime focus of the, time there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would say there's a visibility issue. Would you say there's also an issue of power dynamic between a performing and a non-performing artist?
I would
like
say
in the way
so.
the relationship. Yeah. So how
Yeah.
might that play into the mental health conversation?
I think that, again, we're going to take this sample scenario. I think
Sure.
that if you're, and again, this is just my perception. Things might be completely different, and maybe I don't know. And I would love, for people to chime in and to correct me if things are different. But, in terms of power, I would almost say that while lighting and costumes and camera crews and everybody have the power of making things look good, of making everybody look the way things should be, and having the pristine, clean, like cleanliness of exactly what they want to portray on the screen. I think that sometimes maybe they're overlooked because, again, the actor is the center of attention. Maybe there is this type of power struggle as the actor wants everything, or they might want certain things their way when it cannot be provided for them because of certain aspects or difficulties that it might cause other parts of the sets or the crew. So in terms of power, I don't want to say that the actors have more power in this scenario. I don't want to say that they would have more power, but I guess it just my viewpoint is that they are more of the priority, it would seem like.
Okay. Sam, I'm sure that this kind of thing um, comes up in social work as a field in general quite a bit. I wonder if you have any thoughts.
Well, like the way that I can relate to it is like I work with children. So I work with like children who may have been like the priority, who maybe like the dynamic is shifting because there's another sibling, like they're getting older, so they're getting more independent. So what I would say kind of like each unit of like the arts community and each unit of like that family unit is all necessary and needed to make the organization operate. But like you said, like sometimes like the artist might be seen more. And another thing that I was thinking about too is if someone doesn't get their way, what I see a lot is like the kids are told no, or like there's things are taken away, and it's hard for them to cope with that. It's hard for them to understand like, oh, I can't get my way. But it's like an artist, and this applies to everyone, like an artist, even if like it's in like the background or like in front of the camera, like it's sometimes hard for people to kind of cope with being told no or not getting their way. And like I feel like that's something like a big thing that like that can be play into that power dynamic of like I'm in front of the camera, maybe like I need it to be this way, but someone can be like, no, like we can't do it that way, and like they might have reasons for it, but it's also hard. Like people need to kind of learn to cope with that dynamic and cope with like treating everyone as an equal. And I feel like what you said, which was really interesting, of like someone in front of the camera, their mental health will be like broadcasted. Like we know a lot about like the artists that we see, like Demi Lovato and all of her struggles, but like her crew, like people that are around her, we don't see that. And like someone who's working with her could have the same struggle, but we don't know that. So I think like it's very interesting to kind of try to see that as an equal, like, oh, like Demi Lovato has this platform where she can speak about what she's doing, and all her issues are kind of broadcasted, but kind of understanding that like she's going through this, but someone else can be going through this, we don't see it. So kind of like I feel like it's like the invisible versus like visible disability, where we see her visibly, but other people are still going through the same thing. So it's like kind of understanding how like her in front of the camera, how she's perceived, and also kind of bringing that, or even like minimizing that in a sense of like if you're seeing someone who's not going through that, like not broadcasting their issues, like she should be working on her stuff in a way that she can do it without being broadcast. So like I don't know, I think it's kind of just a very complicated situation because there are like they're not she's not an idol, but she is in the spotlight. So she does have that added, I would say, stress, and that added like she's seen, versus people who are not seen. And I think that's a very important thing to remember, because if someone's in the background, you might just be like, oh, they're just doing their job. Like, we shouldn't, like, they're not important. But that's not the case at all. Like, their struggles are still very much their struggles. Their story is still very much their story. So understanding that, like, they need their time, or they need their space as much as the person in front of the camera needs their time and their space to cope with what's ever happening. Like, go take the space that they need if they're triggered by something. Like, being able to give everyone that space is very important, and everyone, I think, should be treated equal.
Well said. We have time for one final question. And then we'll kind of bring things to a close. And I'll ask you both if there are any kind of final thoughts or resources that you might want to mention to our audience. The final question that we have, and this is directed towards both of you, how can you bring up discussions about mental health and disabilities with people in your organization who might be used to outdated approaches to the subject? Say, for example, a manager having a discussion with an assistant, or vice versa. This plays a little bit also into the discussion about power dynamics as well that we kind of alluded to earlier. Sam, let's start with you.
Well, I think the first thing that's important is, like, everyone should kind of be educated on the more, like, on the updated approaches. So I think that's a first way to start that conversation. So, like, a lot of parents that we work with, we have to educate them, because they do kind of have that, like, mentality of, like, medication's not good, or, like, which they have that right to, like, not want to do medication. But sometimes we have kids who are, like, so severely, like hallucinating and, like, really struggling, that, like, medication will help with their, like, help their brain chemistry to either reduce those symptoms or stop those symptoms. So having, like, that outdated approach, like, taken away is, like, I think the first step in having that conversation. And if it's, like, the assistant or the manager, like, I think that needs to be discussed. Also, I think as a manager, you should be brought up onto those approaches, because it's your job as a leader, like we spoke about before, to have those resources available. And if you, like, are the manager and, like, someone is saying something that is outdated, or, like, is, like, saying, like, negative words that may have been appropriate in past but are not appropriate anymore, educating them and understanding why. So I think, like, bringing up that discussion is important. And also, I think what a lot of organizations need to do in every field is to have generalized, like, conferences or conversations about mental health, so that it's easier to bring it up in day-to-day conversations. Because someone could say something and about mental health, and, like, there's a huge stigma. So it's like, well, how do I start this conversation? What do I need to do to, like, educate this other person? So having that, like, generalized conversation, which could help, like, okay, like, this is what I know, this is how I can help this person understand, like, that's the first step, I think, in being able to reduce the stigma, to, like, end the stigma and to find ways to have meaningful daily, weekly conversations about this topic.
Rebecca, any thoughts as well? Kind of more specifically in performing arts organizations?
I think that I definitely want to echo pretty much a lot of what Sam said. It's very, very important to stay up to date with, what's current and what is the appropriate response and the appropriate way to handle these situations. To be honest, I feel like in the performing arts, I know that, like, there are many, many companies out there, who probably do have these conversations. I don't personally feel, and I don't personally know, that these conversations have come up, or people do talk about them, especially in, like, major orchestras. I'd be very curious to know further and maybe do a little bit of investigating, like, to see if there's any conversation regarding that. done with the employees, done with the leaders, and done with, you know, the entirety of, you know, an orchestra. In terms of performing arts, I mean, so for example, I will like briefly just plug in Brass Out Loud. For me, part of my role at Brass Out Loud is to make sure that this conversation is had. And I do feel like generation-wise, there still might be a gap between things. And that's why I feel like having, you know, millennials, Gen Z, whatever we want to, you know, call this younger generation, I think it's important to listen and to learn from us who are more updated with the times, who are more updated with, you know, things going on, whether it has to do with, you know, ethics, morals, you know, racism, gender, anything about this that can affect your mental health in a workplace. I feel like we are kind of the generation that is changing the, I don't want to say rules is bad, but changing the way we talk about this. I feel like our generation is definitely more equipped in a way to handle these conversations versus the older generation. And again, we grew up in different times, they grew up in different times. However, we always say, like, when it gets to certain points, that you have to get with the times. So, you know, like Sam was saying, you know, if you're in charge, you have a responsibility to make sure that you're up to date with, you know, the laws, the ways you may handle situations if they do arise. And it's your, and again, if you're a manager or a leader or anything, whether it's in the arts or whether it's not, it's your responsibility to properly handle these situations. So with that being said, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Well, I think that's some great thoughts to leave us on. There's some clarification on the question. I guess, so this is from Connor again. I guess more what I'm asking is, how can you break through to people who aren't as open to discussions on this subject? Yeah, Rebecca, if you want to respond to that.
To be honest, and this is how I feel about a lot of situations that have come up, especially within the past year. There are people out there who are completely stuck in their ways, who believe that this does not exist, whether it's, you know, we're talking about mental health. Some people don't believe that mental health problems are real. They don't believe, like, they don't see it. They don't want to believe that this is, you know, troublesome in certain communities. You know, we're talking specifically about performing arts. With that being said, the best thing that you can do is offer your resources, and you can offer your thoughts, facts, opinions, to open this discussion to people. But I will say, and this is very much very similar things that I've said on Brass Out Loud regarding different topics of conversation. There are people whose minds you're never going to change. And that is just the unfortunate reality of some things. And sometimes all you can do is speak your piece and say, this is what's needed. And I really, really hope that you understand and see that. And if you don't, I'm very sorry, but this is, you know, it's not a safe space if a leader or a manager or somebody is not addressing these problems. And to be honest, I mean, I wouldn't feel bad reporting the person if it was necessary, if it was harming people in the workplace. Absolutely. I think that at some point, like, not everybody is always right. And with that being said, you know, I go back to the statement of there are some people who will never change their minds, who will never agree with the things that you agree with, who will never, you know, look a different way because it's the right way to look.
Sam, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, what I was going to say was very similar, but yeah, like if you can throw all your resources at them, you can tell them everything that you want to tell them. But if someone's not going to listen, or they're not going to want to listen, then it's not going to happen. So like, I think it's important to even just like Rebecca said, like have that conversation. Just be like, I'm going to tell you my piece, and because I think it's important for you to listen. But if you're not going to respond the way I want you to, you're not going to like take it into consideration when you're doing your work, then I can't stop you from doing that. But I think it's important as a manager, as someone, even like as any leadership, it's important for that education piece. I think that being a leader comes with educating others. And you can do all the work you want. You can have all of the talks, we can have all these talks, but it will never work with someone who is very dead set in their ways. And I think it's important to be like, hey, I want to tell you something, and have that open conversation of like, I like to know like why you're thinking this too, because if we can get behind the why, maybe there's some systematic changes that can happen to help like educate people more, and maybe in a way that they might respond better to. So I think it's important to have these conversations, and I think if someone wants you to break through, they'll allow you to, but some people will have that wall up and not let you come through.
That makes sense. Okay. Well, I think we will leave it there. We are a little bit over time. So thank you for those of our audience members who stayed for a few extra minutes with us. It's been a pleasure, once again, having you guys both here. It's been wonderful to talk about what is a really critical conversation in the arts. Thank you all, those of you in the audience, for listening as we've spoken with Rebecca Karu, founder of Mind Over Practice and Brass Out Loud. And Sam, who's a wonderful master's student at social work in Rutgers. We look forward to seeing you both completing your master's degrees, and Rebecca off to her DMA as well. So thank you guys for being here. And we will see you all in our audience next month. We are inviting a wonderful artist manager. Speaking of having discussions with managers and things like that, we'll be inviting a wonderful artist manager to come talk to us about the field of artist management, how power dynamics are involved in that, how gender is involved in that. It's a fascinating discussion, and you will not want to miss it. We'll be posting more information about that soon, but that will be next month live on our YouTube channel. With that, thank you guys, and see you all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.